Okay, welcome to the video for lesson 5-6, day 2. Today we're going to talk about solving two-step equations with the distributive property again. So, as we talked about in the previous video, we have steps that we're going to want to follow. The first step is if we see any number outside of parentheses, we need to expand the expression using the distributive property, multiply the number outside by all of the terms inside. So that means we need to use an area model. So I'm going to bring over the area model to remind you that that's what we're doing. We're using an area model for step 1. Step 2, we're going to add or subtract the constant. Step 3, multiply or divide to get the variable all by itself. And step 4 is our check. And remember, when we check, we want to make sure that we put a smiley face if it does indeed work out. Okay, let's look at an example together. Number 1, we're missing a part of the equation, which is just what's given to us. We have 2 in parentheses and negative 4x minus 1 equals. Fill that in with a negative 18, please. Okay, so step 1, if we see parentheses, which I do, I have parentheses right here. That means I need to multiply this 2 by both of the terms inside of the parentheses. So I'm going to bring over an area model. Again, I usually just kind of put it off to the side because I'm using this to fill in and then be able to put it back into my equation. So on the side, I'm going to put the 2, and on the top, I'm going to put the negative 4x minus 1. So remember, our area model is what tells us that we need to multiply. So on the side here, I need to multiply the 2 times the negative 4x. 2 times negative 4x is negative 8x. And then on the side next to that, we're in 2 times negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So now I can go put that negative 8x minus 2 in place of the 2 times negative 4x minus 1 because I did this distribution using the area model. Okay, so now I rewrote negative 8x minus 2 equals negative 18. Don't forget that line down the middle to remind ourselves that whatever we do on one side, we have to do on the other because we're solving an equation. Okay, so if we want to go steps, step 2 is to add or subtract the constant. Why do we do that? Well, we have an x. It's connected. If I knew what x was, I would do order of operations. I would multiply by the negative 8 first, and then I would subtract 2. So in order to get the x by itself, we need to do the opposite in the opposite order. So instead of having this minus 2, I'm going to add 2 to both sides. When I do that, the negative 2 plus 2 is 0, so those technically cancel. And then I'm left on the left side with a negative 8x. On the right side, I have negative 18 plus 2, which is a negative 16. So now, to get x by itself, x is connected to the negative 8 with multiplication. So to undo that, we're going to divide by the negative 8. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I have to divide both sides by that negative 8. Negative 8 divided by negative 8 cancels because anything divided by itself is 1. So then I'm left on the left side with just my x. And then on the right side, negative 16 divided by negative 8 gives me a positive 2. So my answer here is x equals 2. Okay, so that's my answer. Now I need to check. So in order to check, we start by bringing over the original equation. So exactly the way it was written before, we have the 2, and then in parentheses, negative 4x minus 1 equals negative 18. To check, we're going to rewrite this, but replace our answer for x. So I have a negative 2, and then in parentheses, the negative 4. Whenever I sub in, I use parentheses. So again, I see parentheses. 2, close my parentheses, minus 1 equals negative 18. Then we can put that in our calculator. On the left side, we get negative 18. Now remember, you do want to actually type that all in. You don't want to just assume it's going to equal and check out. We have to make sure that we type it into our calculator to make sure that we do indeed get the answer that we wanted. And we did, so I can put a smiley face there. It does check. Okay, so number 2, we're missing a piece of this equation. So I want you to start by writing in 9 equals negative 3x minus x minus 8 is in parentheses. So my first step is to look for those parentheses. I do see them. I have a negative 3 that needs to be multiplied by the negative x minus 8. So we're going to need an area model. And I'm going to put the one term, the negative 3, on the outside. and then above the area model, I'm going to put what's in the parentheses, and I'm going to put a -1 next to that x, because that negative x just means -1x. Okay, so to fill in the area model, -3 times the -1x, -3 times -1 you can put in your calculator to give us a 3, and then we just have the x there, so my answer there is 3x. And then on the side, I have -3 times -8. -3 times -8 we can put in our calculator, and we get positive 24. So then that gets replaced with what I had, the parentheses. So I'm going to rewrite my equation, and I'm going to draw the line down the middle so we can solve it. So now I have 9 equals 3x plus 24. I need to get the x by itself. So again, we can kind of think what's happening. We're multiplying by 3 and then adding 24. So we're going to do the opposite in the opposite order. So if we follow our steps, the next one is to either add or subtract the constant. I'm looking at the plus 24 because it's plus 24. The opposite of that would be to subtract 24 from both sides. So I'm going to subtract 24 from each side. And then I get -15 as my answer. So on the right side of the equation, we still have the 3x. So now, if we're looking again, what's happening to x? At this point, it's being multiplied by 3. So the opposite of multiplying by 3 would be divide by 3. So I'm going to divide each side by 3. Okay, so then when we divide each side by 3, on the right-hand side here, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so that will kind of cancel out. And then -15 divided by 3 is -5. So that's my answer. -5 is equal to x, which is really the same as saying that x equals -5. Okay, so now I can go ahead and check. Remember, start with the original. So I'm going to start by writing the 9 equals -3, and then in parentheses, -x minus 8. So then I'm going to fill in exactly the way that I had that by replacing the x with a -5. So now I rewrote it as 9 equals -3, and then the negative that was in front of the x comes down, and then x was replaced with a -5. So I'm putting that in parentheses. So it's really a -5. If you wanted, you could have done, well, the opposite of my answer, which is -5. The opposite of -5 is +5. But I just rewrite it, bring down the negative, replace the x with the answer, and then -8. If you've done that and you use parentheses the way that we have it here, you can put this right into your calculator to find out what the answer is. Now remember, we're not just writing that 9 equals 9. We're going to now type in our calculator, -3, parenthesis, negative, parenthesis, -5, close parentheses, -8, and then close another parenthesis, hit enter, and when we do that, we do get a 9. So that tells me that this does indeed check. I did get the same number on each side of my equation. Okay, so for this question, we're just missing the 14. That's the rest of the problem. I just want you to add in, so it's negative, and then in parentheses, the 7 plus 3x, close your parentheses, equals 14. Okay, so if we follow our steps, the first thing we need to do is, we have parentheses, so I need to distribute. In order to do that, I need to bring in the area model. Now, in order to set up the area model, if we have a negative in front, that really means it's a -1 there. So that's going to go on the left side because it's a monomial 1 term. And then I have the 7 plus 3x. We're going to put that on the top. And now that we have our area model, we can go ahead and multiply. So we have a -1 on the left times 7 on the top. So -1 times 7 is a -7. And then on the side, we have a -1 times 3x. -1 times 3x is a -3x. Okay, so now that I have the area model filled in, we can rewrite the equation, draw our line down the middle so we can solve, and bring over what's in that area model underneath what was in parentheses in the first step there. And then we still have the equals 14 on the left side. So my new problem is now -7 minus 3x equals 14. So if we think about what's happening here, if I knew what x was, I would multiply by that -3, and then I would have the -7 there. So -7 with the answer. So if we follow our steps, we're going to do the opposite in the opposite order. So because there's a constant there, we have a -7. We're going to add 7 to both sides so that that -7 can be canceled. -7 plus 7 is 0, so we can cross those out. So when I cross that out, I end up with only a -3x on the left side, and then equals 14 plus 7. I can rewrite it as 21 now. 14 plus 7 is 21. Okay, so now if I'm looking at what's happening to x, it's being multiplied by a -3, so the opposite of multiplying by -3 would be to divide by -3. Anything divided by itself is 1, so this negative 3 divided by negative 3 cancels. That's a 1. So I'm left with just an x on the left side. And then 21 divided by negative 3 gives me a negative 7. And you can put that in your calculator if you need, so we're dividing. And that is our answer, x equals negative 7. Now we need to do the check. So to do my check, I'm going to start by rewriting the original equation that we had. So I rewrote the negative and then the 7 plus 3x is in parentheses equals 14. Now in order to check, we're going to rewrite, but we're going to replace the x with our answer. So I still have the negative and then in parentheses the 7 plus 3 and then in parentheses the negative 7, which was my answer, is replacing the x because now I do know what I think the answer is. So x gets replaced with that answer. Okay, and then I had my parentheses to close it out, equals 14. Then we can go ahead and put that in our calculator. The negative of parentheses 7 plus 3, and then in parentheses negative 7. Close your parentheses and close your original parentheses. Then when you hit enter on your calculator, you end up with the answer of 14. So I do end up with 14 equals 14. Remember, you don't want to just write that. You want to make sure that it truly does check. So you want to put it in your calculator to make sure that we get that answer. Okay, let's try that last one together. Okay, so number 4, I'm again missing part of the equation here, so I want you to start by filling that in. My question is 50 equals 2/5, and then in parentheses 5x minus 20. So first step, I do see parentheses, so I'm going to start by filling in an area model and writing those on the sides. So the 2/5 is going to go on the side. Okay, so I have the 2/5 on the side and then the 5x minus 20 on the top. So now to fill in my area model, we're going to multiply. So we have 2/5 on the side. Remember, we can put that in our calculator. So 2/5 times 5, 2/5 times the 5x. So 2/5 times 5 is 2, and then I still have the x that was there. Then we're going to do 2/5 times negative 20. 2/5, again, using my calculator, 2/5 times negative 20 gives me a negative 8. So now I can rewrite my equation as the 50 equals 2x minus 8. So if we want to follow our steps, we're going to move it and do the constant first. So we have a minus 8. Now, why are we doing this? Because 2 is being multiplied by that x. So if I ask what happened to x, multiplying by 2 and then subtracting 8. So we do the opposite in the opposite order. So following our steps, we're going to add or subtract the constant. Because it's a negative 8, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to add 8 to both sides. Then I have the negative 8 plus 8 ends up giving me a 0, so that will cancel out. And I have 50 plus 8 on the left side, which is now 58. And I have 2x left on the right side, so now I rewrite it as 58 equals 2x. So now, for following our steps, the next step is to either multiply or divide in order to get that variable by itself. So the x is being multiplied by 2. The opposite of multiply by 2 is to divide by 2. So divide both sides by 2. 58 divided by 2 gives me the answer of 29, and then 2 divided by 2 cancels because anything divided by itself is 1. So I end up with my answer of x equals 29, or in this case we wrote it as 29 equals x because the x was on the right side. So my answer is 29. Okay, last step, now we have to check. So start with the original. 50 equals 2/5, and then in parentheses the 5x minus 20. Now I'm going to replace the x with my answer of 29. So now I have 2/5 of, and then in parentheses we have the 5, in parentheses my answer, the 29, close the parentheses, minus 20, and then close that original parentheses. So all I did was rewrite my equation, but the x is now replaced with the 29. Everything else is the same. Now we can put this all in our calculator. Remember, you're going to put in the fraction 2/5, and then parentheses 5, parentheses 29, close your parentheses, minus 20, and then close that parentheses. If you do that, you end up with the answer of 50. So again, we're not just assuming it worked. I am actually typing that in my calculator to make sure that it works. 50 does equal 50, so it checks. All right, we'll do more of these tomorrow, but your secret message at the end here is to just give me a smiley face, straight face, or a sad face to show me how you feel at this point. We've done 2 days of this material. So give me that smile, straight, or sad face to show me how you feel about the topic at this point. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.